If I said to you Sky News, Russia Today, and Ticker TV, what would you say is the common thread? The answer in just a moment. Journalist, presenter, entrepreneur, Ahron Young, welcome.
Hello, good to see you.
I'm sorry we've had a whole lot of tech problems too, because Ahron's in the capital of tech and my little computer wouldn't handle it.
We've got each other now, but one of the great things about running a TV studio is you learn how to deal with technical challenges and to plow on through.
Exactly. Well, in all my time, I clearly haven't learned. We'll get to the marvel that is Ticker in a moment, but I believe that your TV career started in primary school with a replica studio in your bedroom.
Yes, I don't know whether to be proud of this. I certainly didn't invite my friends over often because I thought that once word got out, everyone would think I was a bit nuts. But I had a 7 nightly news set made of crepe paper and cardboard in my bedroom, which was a replica of the kind of 1990s world news background and down to the finest detail. But yes, I took it very seriously, even with a pretend TV tower on the roof. And there was just something growing up on the Mornington Peninsula about the idea of TV, and particularly journalism and news, which I just thought was unbelievable.
So you went through local newspapers at school and did things the old-fashioned way to get into journalism?
Yeah, correct. So I think that, it's one thing to love television, but it's, you have to actually want to do something with it. And telling stories has to be the bigger thing that you want to do. And television is the vehicle for it, or at least it was. It's obviously changing a lot. So I fell in love with storytelling and just the ability to interview people, much like you're doing now, and then to be able to, I guess, learn and tell, the show and tell kind of aspect of it all. So right through high school, I was jumping onto any opportunity that was Win TV in Ballarat when I was 15. And, pushing my way through, even though I was too young to do work experience. And then from there to the local newspaper in Rosebud, which was this crazy newspaper. I've still got the front page, hangs on my wall here in the office, very first front page. And it was just this unique, independent group of people who used to work for the Leader newspaper group, which was owned by News Limited at the time, and decided to do it their own way. And it was just this fascinating group of people who owned this paper, the three of them.
And then you moved into community radio and then launched your first business?
Yeah, so I was 18 or 19 when I started in that local newspaper job. So after high school, I sent out an email to every single radio station and TV, sorry, not an email, a letter to every single radio station and TV station in Australia. Pretty much got all no's, you've got no experience, blah, blah, blah. But I got into community radio, 3RPP, and another one in Melbourne, and just kind of really loved the ability to do it and learned very quickly that if I was doing this for free, I could probably turn it into a business. And so I did. I started something called Como Network News out of my lounge room in South Yarra, and basically approached all of the community radio stations around Victoria, paying 3AW for their news service, found out how much they were charging, did it by half. And pretty soon that got the attention of the news director of 3AW, which then became my first job in Metro Media at age 20.
That sounds so clever. So you were providing radio news updates to rural stations, and then you got the job at 3AW.
Yeah, I was also working at 2GB as an unpaid Melbourne reporter, which probably in 2002 was okay. I can't imagine having anyone unpaid these days, how that would go. But certainly, if you wanted a foot in the door, you had to. And I would just carry a microphone. Half the time I wasn't even plugged in to Melbourne events. I think they just wanted to get their microphone all over the TV news at 6 p.m. for all these big Melbourne stories. And I was the guy, but I was able to use that audio for my little radio news bulletins. And yeah, I think I did it for about 6 months until essentially one day I got in touch with the news director at 3AW who said, yes, I know exactly who you are. Come in for a meeting. Had a meeting on a Friday. The Governor General at the time was in big trouble and he was going to be in Melbourne on a Saturday night. I put my hand up to take a mic down and try and get an interview with him, did. And I had a job on Monday.
And then after 3AW, you moved to the UK in 2005.
Yeah, so 3AW was pretty interesting experience. I was very young, definitely the youngest there, and I felt it. And it was a very hard learning curve, but a great learning curve. You know, metro media job. They take no fools, and I had to quickly not be a fool. Otherwise, you're going to fall over and learn to paint a picture with words and everything you have to do in radio. And I just kept putting my hand up. But heading to Thailand for the tsunami and arriving at Patong Beach and staying in the Novotel Hotel, where there were all these international journalists, it was like the one hotel where everybody was staying, covering the tsunami in Thailand. You had Diane Sawyer from ABC and all of these huge names. And I met this guy who was a producer at British morning show GMTV, and he's like, "You ever come to the UK, hit me up." So you can imagine I came back to Australia, quit my job, and headed to the UK.
What an opportunity.
Well, there was no job. I called him, I got there, and he was basically like, "Oh, we haven't got anything at the moment." So I had to think on my feet fast, and I found some work at a radio news network, and off I went from there, but also worked as a freelancer for 3AW and what was at the time Southern Cross Network, which was 2UE and 6PR and 4PC and 5AA. And that got the attention of Sky News Australia as well. And 2005, when I moved to the UK, massive year in Europe. You had the death of Pope John Paul II. So I went to Rome to cover that. You had the London bombings, of course. You had the royal wedding of Charles and Camilla. There was a lot that happened in a very short amount of time, and it was a great place to be as a journalist.
Perfect place to be as a journalist, as you say. And you say that you accidentally applied for a job in Moscow and moved to Russia?
Yes, well, one of the things that I think is the untold story of life as a freelance journalist, and I have a lot of sympathy for anyone who is you end up spending a lot of money on doing the job, and it's an incredible lifestyle flying to Rome and amongst 4 million Catholics who are rocking up to pay their respects to Pope John Paul II and then the conclave, which I covered for the election of the new Pope. And that was an incredible experience. But the costs were just out of control. You know, try to survive in the UK. The London bombings happened. I was living in Brighton at the time, which is kind of like Geelong to Melbourne. It's about an hour away. Trying to get to London on the train, which is £50, you know, one way on the train. And then you get to London and you've got to stay in a hotel and you're waiting. And not just to mention, but there was no kind of voice or video over internet back then, the way it is now, the way you and I are talking. This was using the phone to call back to 3AW on international roaming. And it was just, I think I probably made about a quarter of what I was spending. So very quickly, I had to get a full-time job or some sort of job. And the newspaper over there that did all the media jobs was The Guardian. And on a Saturday night, one weekend, I saw there was a job ad for new English language news channel launching. And in the UK at the time, you had ITV had a news channel, obviously Sky News, obviously BBC. It felt like every 5 minutes someone was launching a new news channel, but this was an opportunity. And I think I was half a bottle of wine in when I applied for the job. So I can't quite tell you what I wrote, but the next morning, a Sunday morning, I get a call from this guy, Mike, who says, "We'd love for you to come in for an audition as a presenter tomorrow." So off I went, bought a suit, caught the train to London, went to APTN headquarters at Camden Dock, and did a 45-minute ad lib audition talking off the top of my head about Michael Jackson. When a lady sits down with dark hair and a thick Russian accent and says, "How would you feel about moving to Moscow?" And I didn't know anything about Russia other than I love James Bond films, which you
This
wouldn't think,
sounds like a James Bond film.
which you wouldn't think would help you over the line. But whatever I said got me on a plane a week later, moving to Moscow and landing at Domodedovo Airport.
And you launched Russia Today.
So the project was Russia Today, which in the interview it was all about, initially was to be Russia's version of CNN and BBC. And at the time, I never really thought about the BBC being the mouthpiece of the UK or CNN being the mouthpiece of the US. Certainly, I don't think Donald Trump feels that way. But the viewpoint of Russia was that they are always getting a bad deal in the press. And so why not launch their own news channel? And since then, Russia was kind of the first, but since then, Iran's got Press TV, France has got France 24, Germany's got DW, NHK in Japan, CGTN in China. And so all of these governments around the world went, we're going to run these lavish channels. And we had a pretty okay budget. It was in the old RIA Novosti building in Moscow, which is this huge kind of brutalist building, about a 10-minute walk from my home at Kievskaya in
Still
Moscow.
sounds like a James Bond film.
Oh, it was just unbelievable. Like I was there for a year, but I got a lifetime worth of stories out of it. It was just unbelievable.
And then you moved back home and worked at Sky and built up the
Yeah.
business from two people.
Things got pretty tough at RT. It became pretty apparent that this wasn't CNN. It was going to be a mouthpiece. And I got pretty frustrated that they were using the term journalism to run PR.
So essentially propaganda.
Well, imagine the first half hour of each hour was attacking the United States, and the second half hour was how great Russia is. And it just wasn't what I was seeing with my own eyes. And I just felt like I didn't really want to be part of that. And so a lot of us left. There were 84 of us who arrived on that first kind of flight, or that first group. By the time I left, at least half had gone, and it was just the right time. So my mum had a baby, and I came back to visit my little brother. I was 24 years old by this point, and I was flying through Sydney. I had an opportunity to have an interview at 2GB or at Sky. Sky had the 11 a.m. interview. 2GB had a 2 p.m. interview. I went to Sky. Next thing I'm in the CEO's office. Next thing I have a job. And they didn't know what on earth to do with my skill set. I was kind of a reporter, presenter, had traveled overseas. But Australia is a very parochial country in that regard. And I remember the boss at the time saying to me, you've got to go sit in a pub somewhere and get rid of that Pommy accent you've picked up. So that was welcome back to Australia. And after 4 days of being on the production desk, I get a call saying, we're sending you back to Melbourne to be Melbourne Bureau Chief for Sky. I didn't really want to go back to Melbourne. I didn't sign my contract for ages. I was really like, I wanted this kind of 5-year adventure. And after a year and a half, 6 months in London, and then 12 months or just under 12 months in Moscow, here I am back in Australia, back in Sydney, and now moving back to Melbourne. And it was really tough. It was a really kind of, is this where I want to be? Because there was just so much happening around the world. And as much as I love Australia and love Melbourne, that calling for what am I going to do with my life was really loud. It took me a little while, and I moved back to Melbourne, and Sky was based at the Channel 9 offices, studios in Richmond, the beautiful old television city, as they called it, in that brick building, which used to be a soup factory, and before that, a piano factory. And it was an amazing place to learn the craft.
Very sadly missed.
Yes, without actually being employed by Channel 9, but built up some wonderful friendships, and I think also some respect. I was a video journalist. When I moved there, Sky didn't have any cameras or any cameramen, certainly not. And I bought this little camera in Moscow and started using that to film my pieces to camera. And then was kind of one of the first video journalists as a result. And I just loved the ability of being able to create my own stuff and then edit it and then send it to Sydney.
So this is prior to the ubiquity of mobile phone cameras.
Oh, man. So I'll give you just a quick snapshot of what the process was. Let's say it's a court story. I go along and find out that Channel 9 was sending a reporter. I go sit in the courtroom, take notes, see the 9 reporter was going out. This was kind of before the 11 a.m. news and the 4 p.m. newses, when they just had a half hour, 6 o'clock news. And so I go out to try and catch the cameraman and the reporter. Once the 9 reporter had done their piece to camera, I'd jump up, do my bit. And then that cameraman would head to 4 or 5 other stories before eventually taking the tape back to News Exchange, where I'd be eagerly standing by waiting for it to send it to Sydney. But first it had to go to the news break producer, and then the news break editor, and then back on the shelf. And then that 6 p.m. reporter who I was in court with needed to edit their story and write their story. And then eventually it would get back. And I had this tape. By now it's about 4 p.m. in the afternoon.
Wow.
And then I'd write my story, voice my story, go into News Exchange where we had our own tape deck. I'd have to call TCN's producer because it had to go from GTV to TCN out to Sky. So you needed 2 lines to be free at the one time. That would never happen, particularly at 4 or 5 in the afternoon before the 6 o'clock news. And then finally you get through and you'd have to call an editor. And then you'd hope that that editor would be free because I only had a couple of editors at the time to be able to cut your story. You go home and watch your story, and they had to deal with 7 and 9, and they play the 7 or 9 reporter's story instead of yours. And you just like, this was in the first 6 months, but you can imagine for me, I was like, I got to find a way around this, and having your own camera, editing your story, and then sending it over was the way to go. And when live views and all that came about, it changed things incredibly. And then really it was about jumping into live TV, and it wasn't so much about pre-recorded content, but the ability to talk underwater about anything, which, if you can't tell by now, is a gift.
Yes, I don't share it, fortunately, for everyone else. Just before we get on to Ticker, some memorable stories from Sky News.
I think that, I mean, Sky was just great. Like, it was at the absolute forefront of what we were doing. At the time, it was a little bit off Broadway in that it was, on pay TV behind a paywall. It was a third owned by 7, 9 and B Sky. So there was this kind of entrepreneurial empire that we had where we could do what we wanted and try it. And my granddad and I built the set in Melbourne at one stage.
Wow.
Literally built the set, went to Bunnings and built the set. I guess it taught me that I could manage staff as well as do the job, which set me up perfectly to start Ticker.
It sounds like the perfect setup for Ticker. So you left Sky with equipment that you owned and decided it was now or never to launch your own news network for the streaming age.
Yeah, correct. So 2019 came about, and it was very much kind of like, if not now, when, and will it ever happen? And it had been in my mind for such a long time. And there'd been this channel in America, this network called Cheddar, that had started 4 years prior, and I've been kind of aware of it. It was an independent news network started by a guy named John Steinberg on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. It was kind of they call it the next gen cable network, kind of like CNBC, but not for old people, was the vibe. And started off with a small valuation, built up, sold for $200 million in 2019. And not that I really did it because of that, but that taught me that this wasn't the world's craziest risk, that someone had done it before and it had worked, and we'd entered the streaming age, and no longer did you need a satellite in the sky or a tower on a hill to become a TV business. You could actually do it yourself using technology. So that was how it worked, and it gave me the belief that I could do it. I had a couple of friends who were really supportive of the idea. And so launched in, I think it was August of 2019, the 19th of August was the first day, rented a small co-working space in Melbourne CBD, just kind of for proof of concept, bought everything I didn't own but needed off eBay. I think it was the night before we launched that I worked out what computer system we were going to use. So you can imagine that was a late night. And then also,
this is so impressive. You come from a journalism background, but obviously you've got the entrepreneurial side of it as well. And you worked all this out yourself.
At the end of my time at Sky, I was sent up to Townsville, and just as an example of what you needed. And I had a cameraman, and we arrived on the Saturday. There were terrible floods. There'd been a huge cyclone that had come through, terrible floods. And there we were. And on the Monday morning being pretty important news-wise, the cameraman messaged to say, I'm sick. And I'm like, okay, this is what am I going to do? So I used my mobile phone and found this system that allowed me to log into Sky's network to be able to broadcast live right through the morning while the cameraman was holed up in bed. And so we got through that, and the boss called me and said, tell your cameraman he did a great job. And I'm like, I didn't have one. It was my own. And really, that was the moment that technology had arrived. And I think that it taught me that, but also that ability to there's kind of a news channel as this and do whatever it takes kind of mentality.
Yes.
And once you take that across to your own business, and you've got that whatever it takes, this has to work mentality, I think it's going to be okay.
Now, apologies, I'm going to have to give some background to this to explain Ticker. At most networks, the news is a flagship product. It gives the network identity. It usually leads into their major evening programming, and it's 365 days a year. The news never stops. I directed news at Channel 7 a fair bit in the 90s, and you had to be an octopus, frankly. You switch the program, which is all the changes on screen, and there were so many moving parts. In addition, there was a big set and studio with all the on-screen people, but there was this massive machine bringing it all to the screen. Just some of the departments were journalists and editors, obviously, but for the TV side, there were directors, directors' assistants, camera operators, lighting and audio operators, auto cue operators, and many, many other jobs. This all changed over a decade ago with the introduction of Mozart, which is a computer-controlled software that automates a lot of what we did. So, for example, the director was replaced by an operator. The director's assistant, who did all the timings and prompts, was replaced by a computer voice, much like Siri. Camera operators were replaced by robot cameras. It's a structured show where only a certain number of permutations can take place. And you've all seen footage of computer cameras going rogue. If you haven't, check it all out on YouTube. It's worth a watch. Auto cue largely became a computer-controlled operation, most often by the reader themselves, and things like the weather computer that the director used to have to operate became simply a clicker for the presenter. Audio and lighting largely also became the domain of this system. That's all background for Ticker, because what Ahron is about to tell you will blow your mind like it did mine.
Now, I love all of that. And I love I always say that every person who works in television, there's probably someone inside them who wants to work in film. And I would imagine that the film industry looked at the advent of television much like people who worked in television in the 90s must look at television today. I think about so many of my friends who worked alongside you at Channel 7 in the 90s here in Melbourne, who don't work in the industry anymore. And they talk about how it's like call centers these days. And it's nothing like the joy of what it used to be. I think about Peter Hitchner, who's a good friend and has always been a great kind of mentor and supporter. I've known him since those community radio days. And I once asked him, what's your favorite era in TV? Was it the 80s? You know, everyone talks about the 80s when I was born as this incredible time of, you know, Channel 10 flying helicopters down to the Portsea pub on weekends and all this money that I have never seen in TV in my entire career. And he just simply says, it's now. It's the fact that I'm still here. And I love that. And that's been my vibe as well. So I was at Sky when Mossack came in. I saw what happened to the workforce. I saw the people who decided to keep pushing through and those who said, time's up, I want to go to a different industry. And I have always been determined to stay at one way or another. I think about those people who kind of die on air almost. And I really can understand that it's just got this incredible pull where you just want to be involved one way or another. And for me, it was getting to a point where I started thinking, how am I going to get to retirement age when it feels like the older you get in TV and the more expensive you get, the bigger an X is on your back? It wasn't necessarily my case, but I have seen that everywhere,
Yes.
right? And so why not perhaps take some control over your future? And TV is very subjective, particularly when you're on air. 1 minute you're loved, the next you're not. And so in order to be able to survive, I had to create a business plan that have the technology, because as you say, all of that incredible tech of auto cue operators and things. I mean, at Sky, I'd never had an auto cue operator. It was a foot pedal. I used to say, I'm going down to spend 8 hours to sew, because it's like a foot pedal for the teleprompter. And so starting Ticker was this great thing to do because there were no legacy systems. I didn't have to let teams of people go because new technology around. We were starting off with a blank sheet of paper. What does a TV platform look like in 2019? And it's continued to change. We keep changing. I was here over the weekend, literally automating our schedule and learning to script. So the night before I started Ticker, I found this thing called vMix and this other thing called Tinkerlist. And together, working with those different platforms, tech products, we were able to bring them together and to create this unbelievable automation that takes Mozart to 10 levels beyond where they're at. Both through the fact that when I present, and I know you've seen this, right hand is teleprompter, left hand I'm hitting spacebar, and that spacebar is linked to something called Q's, which is an automator for vMix, which takes all of the content that I've uploaded. My days generally start at 5 a.m. at home, where I'm watching the overnight news broadcasts from America, the UK, and the morning shows in Australia, choosing what's going to basically lead our news. And I'm using the cloud to upload video content. Much of it is user generated from Twitter. I mean, I remember having an argument with one of the news agencies when the war broke out in Ukraine saying, your pictures are terrible compared to what's being generated on the ground by citizens. Why am I paying all this money? And so I actually ditched that and went our own way. And we're just getting amazing content these days because that's how the news, I mean, if you watch the news, yeah, cameramen, fantastic. They do a wonderful job. I'm just watching ABC News Channel right now in the background. They're covering something happening in Tasmania and it's beautifully done. But all of the pictures from inside Parliament are shot by parliamentary cameras these days. You know, the world changed and therefore the ability to get access to pictures has changed. So write the scripts. We've got a whole bunch of AI that we've worked on as well. And it's not to replace jobs. The fact is we never could afford those people in the first place. For us to have, I mean, John, how many times in the media have we heard people say, we're tired of the Murdochs and the Packers owning everything. We want to have independent voices. So
you've done it.
We've done it. And we've been able to build these really solid, and I have had the pleasure of having people like yourself in my life who remember the good old days. And so my job has been to make sure that our broadcasts look as good as if 100 people are working on them. There's no cutting corners in terms of quality. It has to be amazing. We have amazing cameras. We had an amazing set built by the set designer, Mel Nichols, who did everything from the Channel 7 and Sky and Fox Sports, right back to the Prisoner set and Inflation nightclub here in Melbourne as well, just around the corner. So, you know, I believe that what you see on camera has to be amazing.
It does. So I want people to think about this. Ticker doesn't broadcast. You won't find a tower, the tower that you've made out of cardboard. It all goes via the internet. Ticker doesn't typically have crews. Tell people how you do remote crosses.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting you say that. When COVID happened, obviously, most people always still come into the studio, and we love having people in the studio. We're right in the CBD of Melbourne on the corner of Collins and William Street, right? So I always believe that having a physical presence is really, really important. We have a wonderful facility studio here that we put a lot of time into. But during COVID, I mean, 60 Minutes weren't traveling. They were doing interviews. And in many cases, that's still the case. I mean, budgets have been cut everywhere, and they'll have a camera crew in Paris where the guest is and a camera crew in Sydney where the host is, the interviewer is, and they'll make the backgrounds look the same and match the lighting and the white balance, and away they go. And they're just slightly looking off camera at each other, but they're nowhere near each other. So I think that audiences got used to this during COVID. So we have a great system where, and we've automated this entire thing. We interview between 30 and 50 people around the world every day. And those interviews, many of them, we send out a code and off they come. And when we interview people, either in studio or remotely, the system we've got auto detects who's speaking. So if you're on camera 2 and I'm on camera 1, my microphone knows I'm camera 1 and you're camera 2. So when I'm interviewing you, even in studio, it's auto cutting between who's talking, bringing the super up at the right time and cutting to the wide shot every 30 seconds for context.
So I'm obsolete.
I don't think so. I think that the whole point is we need to make sure that standards are kept. And when I'm actually hosting myself, we're hitting spacebar, spacebar, spacebar during these things, as I say, but not everyone can do it. And we still have someone who's monitoring and making sure that everything looks good and that the audio levels are right and that the cameras are cutting and that the framing's perfect, etc. And that to me, as I say, is still vitally important. But I like to automate the jobs that people don't like to do. And that's how I look at it. Because there are so many jobs that we have to do in TV where it's just another process. And therefore, finding a way to get people to be creative and to spend their days creating something is what I like to do.
Ticker doesn't even have a control room or a director or an operator. Ticker doesn't have editors. Ticker doesn't have graphic operators, lighting technicians, audio technicians, camera operators, or audio cue operators.
Or master control or a news exchange or edit suites or anything like that. I mean, if I want to edit a package, I'll do my voice into my phone or do my voice into a Rode lapel and cut it together. Sometimes I do it when I'm sitting at a cafe on my laptop, or sometimes I do it in my lounge room, and it doesn't really matter where you are these days. You don't need to have what we used to have. The fact is that the money has absolutely crashed out of television. You just have to look at, I think a few years ago, Channel 10 lost 350 million in a year. The rivers of gold for all media, whether it's radio, newspaper, television, it's all gone. Cable in America is every day I open TV News Check kind of Bible over there, and it's Warner's Discovery is cutting more jobs and NBC is cutting jobs. It's everywhere. And so to survive, you have to be lean and you have to have an imagination.
We can't really complain that AI is taking our jobs there. This is the democratization of TV that you're seeing on YouTube and social media. And it's for better or worse.
The good thing is there are now more voices. I mean, there's 35 million channels on YouTube. The bad news is there's 35 million channels on YouTube.
Yes.
And a broadcaster, let's say a free-to-air news network, has to employ all these people, and fewer of them than there used to be. And they've got to get the same number of views as some teenager sitting in their bedroom, putting on a show on YouTube. And we've seen the Mr. Beasts of the world and all of this incredible content coming out, and advertisers just don't care anymore. They want demos, they want eyeballs, they want to make sure that they're getting the right people. So it is changing fast. And I fear for those who don't change with it. I really do. Because it's in free fall at the moment. And my job has been to create a business model which is sustainable. We don't have investors. We don't have seed funding A and round B and round C and all of these great friends who are willing to contribute millions of dollars while we experiment.
It's damn hard for people like myself, but we have to find new avenues to service. And there are still avenues for creativity and, most importantly, for us humans. Progress, like news, never stops.
We have to change fast. We have had a lot of people comment on, gosh, there's been a lot of change. And I'm like, yep. And there will always be, because if we don't, and we keep hoping that viewers will just rock up, we'll die. And thankfully, we're still here.
Certainly are. You just celebrated your 5th birthday in 2024.
Yeah, and on our way to the 6th. And I feel like there's probably been about 5 different businesses in there one way or another. In the very beginning, I had a lot of people, John, tell me what Ticker needed to be. We had some people say, be like GB News, which was starting in the UK. And I'm like, yep. And they've just lost 60 million pounds last year. Like, that's all great. Focus on eyeballs equals revenue. It isn't what it used to be. I'm here to tell you, it is not what it used to be. And the cable networks are finding that, and free-to-air broadcasters are finding that. It's about where is the revenue and how can you build a model around it, and how can you still run a news service. We have a New York studio with Veronica Dudo, who's our bureau chief over there. I employ journalists. We've had journalists in Paris and London and Singapore, all paid. And we've had to find a way to pay people. We've had producers and we've had great people who've started their careers at Ticker now in that 5 or 6 years and have gone off. Some work at Sky News. It's quite funny to watch where people end up. Others have gone to the ABC, and the training grounds has changed, and I think that I often say it must be really easy to get into TV these days, because when I don't know about you, when I was 20, there was no one on air who was under 30. And now when I tune in, it's hard to find people who are over 30. So it's really flipped around. The money has changed.
There's no barrier to entry now like we experience. Everyone has the equipment in their pocket.
Yeah, and it's also harder for broadcast networks to be able to convince people. I mean, the fact is that there's a lot of kind of bureaucracy, there's a lot of policies, there's a lot of expectation out of what you do. But if you want to be famous these days, you start your own TikTok channel, you start your own YouTube channel where you've got that ownership. And I think what we've also seen in America is a lot of people who've become famous on broadcast or on cable have gone off to start their own entire business.
So Ticker now branches into many different types of shows. What are those shows and what's the financial model?
Yeah, we do make a lot of content every day, from the news, which is at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour, if you think about a news wheel, and programming. But we also do a whole bunch of interviews with business leaders from around the world. We've kind of created a really unique place for people to tell their story. So it isn't tell me about your business. I would never want it to be like an advertorial, but rather we invite people to come on to Ticker to talk about things that are happening in the news that they happen to be experts on, right? So, for example, cryptocurrency. And so a lot of people then, and this is the reality of TV, they want their clips, they want to be able to tell their story and show that they're on the news. They want to show that they were interviewed by someone about something happening for their LinkedIn, or for, if you speak to anyone about Google SEO, they say you need to constantly provide content. And so we've created a platform to make it really easy for people to come on to do an interview for 5 or 6 minutes with one of our experienced hosts about the news of the day or the topics of the week. And then they quite often will buy their clip. We've built out a bunch of different packages as well, where we can write articles about it and really bring them for the journey so that they get something out of it to show the world. It isn't pay for play. We don't charge people to come on for interviews. It's only if they want the clip. So come on, do an interview, you're on air, we give you the broadcast, you're right across our platforms right around the world. We've built up these incredible platforms, from Ticker being on the NBC streaming platform in America, through to Flash in Australia, LG channels, Samsung TV Plus in Europe, Rakuten, all of the different platforms. So you're on there if you come on. But if you want a copy of the clip, just like you have to pay if you go on Sky News and you want the clip, or ABC, we've built that into it. And so therefore, that was kind of our first revenue model. Then people would come and say, I actually want to do a show about my industry. And I'd say, all right, well, let's build it. We have to maintain the editorial rights to that, but you can host it or co-host it with one of our presenters, and it will be sponsored by your company. We make it very clear that this is the case. And we build these programs out, and they work on YouTube and podcasting, and essentially a content creator studio for that, mixed in with news content that we produce every day, which is, I do Ticker Today every day, twice a day. We have Veronica in America who does In America Today about US politics and world politics as well. And so it's kind of a mix of news and information about different industries, and it's worked pretty well.
Sure has. Well, you sort of covered it, but how do people find Ticker?
Tickernews.co is the website. The apps are on the iOS store if you want the mobile app, or of course, Apple TV, Google Play as well. So you can get that on a bunch of different devices, including Foxtel, but also your smart TVs too. We're on a whole bunch of different platforms as a streaming channel, as a fast channel, as they call them, free ad supported TV. But we wanted to build a platform that wasn't reliant on advertising, because as I say, how's that going? We wanted it to be something that was based on people coming on, finding value in what we do, and we built pretty well from there.
Well, I have to thank you so much for your time. It really is an impressive operation, and it is the new world. So
I hope so. Thank you for having your interest. And as I say, I absolutely love building a bridge between where we've been and where we're going. And that's been our mission at Ticker. So thank you.
Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.